Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dead Poest podcast. I'm your host for today. I'm John Israel Tibor, and we're going to talk about listening, the importance of listening in communication. So we're going to ask maybe three participants to share their ideas, concepts, or opinions on how listening plays a vital role in communication, or maybe by giving feedback, or about the habits of a good and bad listener, or what are the connection between both of them to having a proper communication with one another. So I am joined here by my fellow classmate. I said, okay, if I share your personal information.
Okay ra.
So he is Kyle Tumabini. So the first question is, what are the habits of a good listener?
One of the habits or a good listener has something to do with a proper understanding and listening into the interviewee and on how you understand such a question and how you deliver or how you deliver your feedback towards back to the interviewee.
So the second question is, what are the habits of a bad listener?
One thing that catches my attention of being a bad listener is that you are not paying attention to the person who is talking in front of you, or like you are having interaction with, or like your attention is out of the blue and not focused all the time.
The third question is, what are your experiences of good and bad listeners?
Oh, I see. Okay, so I've been here in UCLM for about 6 years, 6 to 5 years, 5 years to 6 years, I think. And I have encountered many individuals who are good listeners. They pay attention towards who is talking in front, and they give feedbacks and understands the question. And to those bad listeners, well, I've experienced that I did a report in front of everybody, and a lot of my classmates are not listening. They are using their phones. They are talking with each other, and so it's very irritating at the same time, very sad because I have delivered some information that could be a lesson for them and a direction for a guidance for them throughout the lesson, and yet they tend to not listen to me.
So do you usually do something to those bad listeners, or
Yeah, I usually call them out so that I could gain their attention, and so that they will listen to me when the time that I will continue talking in front of them.
so for the last question is, what do you think is the importance of listening in communication?
Okay, listening and communication is very important because you cannot just provide an answer without a definite understanding with how a question is delivered and how a question is given to you. Because if you are not able to understand the situation or the questions that is being given to you are tend to have a miscommunication with each other. There could be a boundary or a barrier between the two of you because you don't really understand the question that is pertaining, or what is the meaning of the question that is being asked by you.
Okay, so thank you, Kyle, for giving a short time for this mini interview.
Thank you.
So for the next interviewee that we have is someone who is a professional licensed teacher who's been teaching for more than 8 years. So before I start giving out the question, is it okay if I share your personal information for this video?
Uh, would you mind if I decline?
Okay, so would you prefer if I call you by your alias?
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
So what is your alias?
Uh, Muiz, call me Muiz.
Okay, Mr. Muiz. So the first question is, what are the habits of a good listener?
Okay. What are the habits of a good listener? Okay, so depending on the context, we have listening, different listening types. Okay, whether it's in a crowd or in a classroom. However, what I want to talk about is there are two habits of a good listener, or two skills rather. I'd say that if that listener is able to use the top-down listening strategy and the bottom-up listening strategy. The top-down meaning he or she creates meaning or inference from his or her word bank, from the head down to the listening material. Second is the bottom-up strategy is when you use the listening material to infer meaning back to your word bank or back to your head, from text to the listening material and from the listening material to the text. And personally, I think those are the skills or the habits that composes a good listener.
Okay, so for the second question is, what are the habits of a bad listener?
The habits of a bad listener, if that listener is easily distracted, just being distracted alone, it ruins the purpose of listening. Because when you are listening to a material, you should listen actively. Because we know hearing and listening is different from each other. Listening uses concentration. But if you're easily distracted, then you will miss out on different pieces of info that was given out by the material. And also, aside from being distracted, is if the listener has little patience. Patience is important as it helps us to gather more information and it helps us to understand the listening material more.
Okay, so for the third question, what are your experiences of good and bad listeners?
Based on my experience, I've seen a lot. There are good listeners, like from what I've mentioned earlier. Good listeners are those who listen actively and those who take down notes. Because what use is listening if you're not going to take down notes? It is important to note the crucial details from the listening material. Good listeners are able to do that because the good listeners know that what they're listening to has some important details that they need to write down. While bad listeners, from what I've mentioned earlier again, they are those who are easily distracted by the sound from outside the classroom, by the noise their classmates are making. They're the ones who are easily distracted. However, it is not a good thing. A bad thing, because distraction is always there. There will always be barrier between communication. What I find hard is that if they continue to keep on maintaining that bad habit of being easily distracted, then it becomes a bad attribute for them. That is why we can identify who are the good and bad listeners.
Okay, so for the last question, what do you think is the importance of listening in communication?
As we know, communication is a two-way process. We have the sender and the receiver. And it is the same with every other aspect of communication. We have the speaker and the listener. Listening in communication is important. And it is important because it is what creates meaning in communication. Aside from receiving the message, if you are not able to decode or if you're not able to analyze the message because you did not listen carefully, then communication will not be effective. Because communication is only an effective process if there is a feedback. There will never be a feedback if the receiver did not listen carefully. And that is why communication is a two-way process that involves speaking, listening, and creating feedback. Creating feedback comes from listening, and that is why we all know that listening is very important, even if we are not going to gather more answers. Because from listening itself, just like what we are doing right now. You are listening, you're listening. Maybe you're taking down notes. And while I'm speaking, communication is being effective, is becoming effective because you're listening. You are actively listening from what I am talking about. And that is why I think listening is important in communication, because listening is crucial to creating feedback, and feedback is needed for communication to be as effective as possible. That would be all.
Okay, so thank you for giving out a short period of time participating in this video. So for the next interviewee for this little podcast that I have is my mom. So before I start asking question, is it all right for me to share your personal information for this video?
Yes, my pleasure, my son.
So for the first question is, what are the habits of a good listener?
To be a good listener, we have to listen, understand, not just to respond. And let us practice good eye-to-eye contact.
Okay, so for the next question, what are the habits of a bad listener?
So the habits of a bad listener, they are non-stop talking and talking, and some listeners only hear what they want to hear.
Okay, so for the third question is, what are your experiences of good and bad listeners?
So when it comes to good experiences, to a good listeners, they allow others patiently to express themselves without interruptions. And for bad listeners, they are not open-minded. They interrupt constantly.
And for the last question for this is, what do you think is the importance of listening in communication?
The importance of a good listener, they concentrate on what is being said without any distractions.
So thank you for answering my question, Mom. So that's it. So that's the end of me interviewing the specific or chosen participants for this mini vlog or mini podcast that I have done. So let me give further insights for this specific topic. So the habits of a good and bad listeners do actually vary from age and social status, as though there are many variables that could affect this. So let's say for example in age, as we grow older, hearing loss is a common problem that we will face. So from hearing loss, it will affect our communication with one another. It will have a negative effect, which you cannot properly communicate with one another. So let's say for example in social status, for example, if you are from a higher status or you have more privilege than the other one who you're talking to, you tend to be blind by your ego or your pride that you are above them. So you tend to listen less about their opinion because you think that you are much higher than them. So it do vary from age and social status, and I don't think that they are similar, but they have the similar effect that could affect effective communication. So next is the importance of listening in communication. The importance of listening in communication, as it fosters understanding, it builds rapport, and allows for effective response. It allows you to give proper response depending on the situation that you are handling in that specific time. It also helps create a connection by showing respect and consideration for others' perspective. So, have you ever wondered how listening is the ultimate passport to understanding different bits of life? Okay, so picture this. You're on a sonic adventure, switching between stations of cultures, religions, ages, and more. So listening is like turning up the volume of someone else's experience. It's not just hearing words. You're not just passively listening. It's it's feeling the vibes of their story or their specific perspective. Imagine it as a playlist of perspectives. The more you play, the more you vibe with the world's diverse tunes. So grab your headphones, hit play, and let the symphony of understanding begin.